Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and we've got two more videos for the Battle for Zendikar set review. We've got this one, and tomorrow this one's going to cover the multicolored cards and the artifact cards. Tomorrow we will cover the naturally colorless cards and the lands. As usual, if you want to hear the disclaimers about this set review, you should check out the white set review if you haven't already, but we're going to jump right on into the first card, which is Angelic Captain. Angelic Captain is a 3 red-white creature angel ally at rare. She's a 4/3, she's got flying, and whenever Angelic Captain attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other attacking ally. 4/3 flyer for 5 is pretty darn good. I've talked a fair bit this set review about how 5 is kind of where 3/3 flyers live with some sort of upside, and getting better than that is really good, and this is pretty darn good. Now 3 one color and one different color is a bit more expensive than 3 color, but that's fine. In the ally deck, this gets a little bit bonkers, actually. It does require you to be in a position to attack freely, which does make it slightly win more, because if I'm in a position where I can attack with 3 or 4 of my ground allies, I'm probably just winning the game anyway, so it is a little bit win more, but it's still not too bad. It's certainly not a pack one, pick one card. Of course, very few gold cards ever will be. But you can be quite happy with this if you're already red and white, or maybe if you're red or white. This might be what pushes you into it if you get this mid-pack 1, or if you open this pack 2 and you've only decided on one color. I think it's decent. I think it's a really good curve topper for the red-white ally deck. I just don't think it's quite first pickle. I don't think it's quite super bomb territory. Almost slightly disappointing that it is a rare. It kind of feels like a really good uncommon, but I'm going to go with B on it. As I said, I think it's fine if you're in these colors, or if you're in one and kind of shopping around for a second color, but I wouldn't go out of my way to take this first pick, so solid B, but no higher. Next up, we have Bring to Light. Bring to Light is a 3 green-blue sorcery at rare. It has Converge. Search your library for a creature, instant, or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast Bring to Light. Exile that card, then shuffle your library. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So as we've talked about, with Converge, generally it's going to be 2, so you're going to be able to search your library for a 2-drop. Whoop-de-doo. Of course, this is a 5-mana spell, so at the maximum, you could potentially find a 5-mana spell that you're going to get to cast for free. And it could be a creature, it could be an instant, or it could be a sorcery card. So it covers most of your bases. You're just not going to be casting, Stasis Field, or whatever it was called, or enchantments. It seems fun. I'm going to say that. It definitely seems fun. But in a blue-green deck, I think this is garbage. I'm not going to pay 5 mana plus a card to go and get a 2-drop that I can cast for free. In the Converge deck, I get to go find probably one of my best spells and cast it for free. So that's pretty decent. However, even in the 5-color good stuff, 5-color Converge deck, I think there's better to do than this. It's kind of the tutor problem. Tutors just aren't that great in limited usually, especially these days when they cost a heck more than 1 and a black. So I don't think this is going to ultimately fit anywhere. I think outside of the Converge deck, it's just a solid F, and I think even in the Converge deck, it's kind of a C+, super cute, good for you if you go off with it, but I wouldn't try kind of card. Slight interaction note is you probably don't want to leave that card in exile. I don't generally know why you would, but if you did, it could get processed away by an opponent's processor, so be careful with that. But I think you would cast the spell right away anyways. So F/ maybe C+, not a great card. Next up, we have Brewed Butcher. This is a 3 black-green creature eldrazi drone at rare. It's a 3/3. It has Devoid. When Brewed Butcher enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless eldrazi scion creature token onto the battlefield. You know what it has. Also, you can pay black, green, and sack a creature to give target creature -2/2 until end of turn. I like this guy. I like this guy a little bit. Well, no, I like him a fair bit. He's technically a 4/4 for 5, which is fine. It's a 3/3 plus an eldrazi scion, so a 4/4 for 5, which is fine. You get some value out of sacking the scion, maybe for mana or maybe for -2/-2. It's got a really nice big threat of activation value going on because, of course, ultimately it can sacrifice itself. It does say sack a creature, not sack any creature. So yeah, you have the threat of activation going on, which is really nice. Basically, your entire opponent's team virtually has -2/-2 whenever they think about attacking. Now, of course, when it comes down to it, only one of them is going to have -2/-2, but that threat of activation kind of spreads it across their whole team and is going to make them really hesitant to do things. Now, it's, as I said, a gold card. I don't think you're ever going to first pick this. There's few gold cards that are going to make you first pick it and go into those colors. It's very dangerous to do that. Very, very dangerous to take a gold card first pick in a two-color format. So I'm not going to put it into the A range either, but I am really happy with it. I do think it's probably one of the better cards to push you into this color combination if you're just one of them. If I'm black and I see this come around, I'll pretty strongly think about going black-green. If I'm green, I'll think about going black-green as well. But I wouldn't take it first pick barely, let's say barely. So I got to go with a B+ on this. I think it's really good. Just shy of first pickable because of the color. Next up, we have Brutal Expulsion. This is a 2 blue-red instant at rare. It's got Devoid, and it says choose one or both. Return target spell or creature to its owner's hand, and or Brutal Expulsion deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that permanent would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So this is really interesting. This is something you don't see often. Return target spell. What that means is take it off of the stack, put it back into your opponent's hand. It doesn't resolve. It's remand, basically. So you can remand the spell, or you can bounce a creature like you're using Voyage's End or On Summon or whatever. Plus, you can deal 2 damage to a creature or a planeswalker if you feel like it. And if that creature or planeswalker would be put into the graveyard, then you get to exile it instead. Really weird. Really, really weird card. This is one of the other cards that I feel really feels like an Eldrazi card, where it's just kind of, what is going on here? So you get remand, except you don't get to draw a card. You instead get to shock. And it costs 4 mana as opposed to 2. I don't think it's better than remand by a long shot. It doesn't remotely compare to a 2 mana remand. But it seems fine enough. Barely. Generally, the rare counterspells we've seen lately haven't been limited playable. I'm thinking Counterflux. I'm thinking that blue-white one. I can't remember. Something about silence maybe in the title. Whatever it was. Rare counterspells just never seem to be limited playable. And I don't think this one's overly limited playable either. I think there's better counterspells for you here. I do like the versatility that it's a counterspell or a bounce spell. That's kind of nifty. The shock is okay, but I'm not sure I really want to play this. It's obviously not even slightly first pickable, and it's really kind of mid to late pack pickable if you're blue-red. Arguably, it is for when you are blue-red and there's literally nothing left in the pack. And even then, I don't think you'd play it. I just don't like it. I think it's probably meant a bit more for Constructed if a blue-red deck ever pops out of Constructed. It happens now and then with janky builds, but, I'm going to go with just a solid D on this. I think you want to pick this really late and maybe have some fun with it some night when you're maybe not trying to win all that well, or you're looking to try something new, but I'm going to go with a D on it. Next up, we have Catacomb Sifter. Catacomb Sifter is a 1 black-green creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon. It is a 2/3. It has Devoid. It says, when Catacomb Sifter enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi sign creature token onto the battlefield, blah, 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 blah. Whenever another creature you control dies, scry 1. Well, that Seems like some pretty serious value. So it is a 3-drop 2/3. That's totally fine. Totally fine, especially with an upside. It makes a Scion, so it's kind of a 3/4. That's really good. So it helps me ramp. Plus, when that Scion is sacrificed to mana, and every other Scion is sacrificed to mana, and anything I control dies, it is anything, right? No, it doesn't count itself. Basically, anything I control dies, I get to scry one. Scry one's awesome. I love scrying. Scrying's the best. This is a super powerful card. It's totally enough. If I'm in black or green and I see this, if this gets passed to me, I'm making a real attempt to go black or green. Still, would never first pick it. Never ever would first pick it. It requires a really special card to be gold and to be first pickable in most sets. So I would never first pick it, but boy, would I be happy to have it. Any other pick where I'm even slightly into black and or green. And if I'm in black-green and I get past this, then I'm going to feel super rewarded. Really happy to have this card. Just so much value going on with it. I've got to go with a B+ on it. Just barely out of first pickable, kind of A- range. Next up, we have Dronas Emissary. Dronas Emissary is a 1 white-black creature, vampire, cleric, ally at uncommon. She's a 2/2, she's got flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. Yeah, so it's a 2/2 flyer for 3. Totally fine. In fact, arguably kind of good. The constant 1 life drain is a totally good upside. It obviously kind of fits into the white-black life gain deck that people are talking about, but I ultimately don't think is going to be that good. I think it might be something that kind of comes together on its own every few drafts. I don't think every draft pod is actually going to be able to support it, which is the big problem for me. But the nice thing is, of course, is that this is just totally and utterly fine on its own. 2/2 flyer, cool. That's going to get in for a good amount of damage, especially being a 3-drop. The fact that every single turn, regardless of what I do, my opponent's going to lose a life and I'm going to gain a life. There's going to be a 2-point life swing is really good. So I've got to go with a really high grade on this one as well. Another solid B+. But again, not a card I would ever first pick. I want to pick this if I know I'm black or white and am looking to explore one of those other color, the other color as a viable option. Next up, we have Dust Stalker. This is a 2 black-red creature eldrazi at rare. It is a 5/3. It has Devoid, it has haste, and at the beginning of each end step, if you control no other colorless creatures, return Dust Stalker to its owner's hand. So Sprinting Warbrute was pretty good, right? Sprinting Warbrute, of course, was a 5/4 that you could dash. You could pay 3 and a red and pop it out. It had haste, and at the end of the turn, it came back to your hand. And this is the same thing, except it's black-red, and you don't get to decide exactly whether you're dashing it or not. It depends on whether or not there's another colorless creature on the board. And it's slightly weaker at a 5/3 rather than a 5/4, but I still think it's going to be pretty good. 5 power haste creatures for 4 are something you really have to look out for. They can just destroy a game. You know, in a matter of a turn or two, they can take a game from maybe kind of stabilizing, maybe kind of okay, to absolute damage control for whoever's being hit with it. Totally not first pickable. Not remotely first pickable. This feels like kind of like Angelic Captain, where it's a good card. It's a fine card. But boy, does it not feel first pickable, and boy, does it not feel like a rare. I don't really know why it's a rare. But whatever. Still solid. If I was in black or red and this got passed to me, I would make a strong consideration for red. Not quite as strong as if I got past Dronas Emissary or Catacomb Sifter or Brewed Butcher, but still strong enough. I'm going to go with a B- on it. I think it's pretty good. It may not be the best card in your deck when you're black-red, compared to Dronas Emissary or Catacomb Sifter potentially being the best card in your deck. So I got to go with a B-. I think it's good, and it's something that I'm just going to get, run over by. Thankfully, not as much as Sprinting Warbrute, with this being rare instead of common, but it's still going to get me. Next up, we have Fathom Feeder. Fathom Feeder is a blue-black single blue, single black. Creature Eldrazi drone at rare. It's a 1/1. It's got Devoid, it's got Death Touch, it's got Ingest, and you can also pay 3 blue black to draw a card and have each opponent exile the top card of his or her library. So you get a card draw plus a free ingest without even dealing any damage. So it's a 1/1 for 2, which is not the best, but it has Death Touch, and of course we all know Typhoid Rats, and Typhoid Rats is pretty darn solid, being a 1/1 for 1. This is nowhere near as easy to cast as Typhoid Rats. This is nowhere near as easy to cast as Fetid Imp, one of our most recent Death Touch blocking everything guys, because of course you need to have both of your colors. But once it's on the board, it's going to block everything, and it can probably somewhat freely attack to get the ingest going, but of course you want to be very careful with your 1/1 Death Touchers attacking with them, because most smart opponents will gladly throw something in front of it early in the game so that it's off the board for when their actual good stuff comes out. So I would be careful attacking with this too regularly. The ability is nice later in the game, which of course blue-black in every set ever is aiming to go towards. It's just basically free card draw. 5 mana, end of their turn, you hold up a counter spell or a bounce spell or a kill spell. They don't play anything worth countering or bouncing or killing. You've got 5 mana. Hey, why not draw a second card? Which seems pretty darn solid to me. I think this kind of falls into Dust Stalker range, both in the case of it doesn't feel like a rare, it doesn't feel that awesome, it's totally not first pickable, but if I'm in one of those colors, it's going to make me think about going into another. It's not going to make me jump into another, but it's going to make me think about it. So I've got to go with a B- on it as well. Next up, we have Forerunner of Slaughter. This is a black-red, single black, single red mana creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon. It's a 3/2, it has Devoid, and you can pay 1 colorless mana to give target colorless creature haste until end of turn. So it's a 3/2 for 2. Probably the better play is to play this as a 3/2 for 2 on turn 3 and pay another mana to give it haste. That makes a little bit more sense. And then unlike most hasty creatures that come down and they usually get in for some damage and then their ability is worthless for the rest of the game, this one gets to kind of pass its haste off every single time you play another creature, as long as you're not tapping out entirely for it, which is totally fine, and in black-red is pretty darn decent. So a 2-drop 3/2 is fine. Playing it as a 3-drop 3/2 is totally fine as well, plus haste is good. And the ability to just give that haste to every creature is really nice in what most black-red decks tend to be, which is hyper-aggressive, kind of suicide black style. I don't care about my life total. I'm just going to get yours to 0 before mine. I'm pretty happy to play this card, I think, in every black-red deck ever, especially if you are playing a large number of Eldrazi, colorless creatures, things like that, to make sure that you can pass that haste off. You, of course, can't pass it off to every creature because it does only go to colorless, but you can give it off to a fair number, especially if you build around it properly. Seems like a pretty high pick for me once I have decided to be in black-red. I don't think this exactly pushes me into black-red, but I think this is a card that I'm happy to see in Pack 2 and Pack 3. Pack 1, I think I'm going to probably pass it most of the time. So I'm going to go with a B, I think just a solid B on it. I like it slightly more than the Feeder and the Stalker, but not as much as the other ones. Next up, we have Grove Rumbler. This is a 2 red-green creature elemental at uncommon. It's a 3/3. It has trample, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Grove Rumbler gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Hey, we're not done with the +2/+2 landfall cycle. We've got a gold one too. So it's a 3/3 for 4 with trample. I've seen better. I've seen worse. That's fine, I guess. Sometimes it's a 5/5 trample for 4. Well, 5/5 trample is pretty darn good. That's usually going to kill a lot of things and trample through for some damage. It's not exciting, though. This card is thankfully not a rare. We've seen some pretty low-powered rares so far in the multicolored. Thankfully, they stuck this one at uncommon. But it just doesn't seem all that much better than a vanilla creature, to be honest. Yeah, if you can get a couple of multiple landfall triggers, if you can like Evolving Wilds into something and make this into a 7/7 trample, cool, good for you. But that's so hard to do and so hard to gamble on what is a mediocre creature in case that maybe happens that I don't really want to jump into it. This just seems generally replaceable to me. I'm going to play it if I, am red-green and need a 4-drop 3/3. So I'm going to go with a middle-of-the-road C on this, but it's not really exciting or super splashy. So I think I'll pass it more often than not. Next up, we have Grove Tender Druids, 2 green-white for a creature elf druid ally at uncommon for a 3/3. It's got Rally. Whenever Grove Tender Druids or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 colorless mana. If you do, put a 1/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield. 1/1 plants really aren't that exciting. I was kind of okay with the retreat to Emeria making 1/1 core ally creature tokens, and I'm totally fine with everything making 1/1 Eldrazi Scion tokens, blah, 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 you know the rest. 1/1 plants that I am paying mana for, I do have to pay a colorless mana to make them, just doesn't seem that exciting to me. Maybe there's a green-white tokens deck here if you have a whole bunch of the pump your team spells or creatures, but this just feels like a lot of work to me. A lot of work to me, especially in an allies deck, which probably wants to be pretty simple. You know, play an ally, give your team first strike, attack. Play an ally, give your team double strike, attack. Play an ally, get a cool ability, do some damage. Play an ally, get a 1/1 plant, just doesn't seem that good to me, especially when I have to pay for it. So I'm gonna ultimately be out on this card, I think. Maybe it's got some utility that I'm just not seeing. I'll keep an eye on it, I guess, but I'm really not looking forward to playing this card. I'm going to cut this whenever I can, basically. Kind of like the Grove Rambler. Unless I really need a 3/3 for 4 in my green-white deck, I'm probably going to pass up on this. So I've got to go with a middle-of-the-road C on this, maybe even a C-. Next up, we have Herald of Kozilek. This is a 1 blue-red creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon for a 2/4. It has Devoid, and colorless spells you cast cost 1 colorless mana less to cast. This seems kind of fun. However, these specific type of cards cost 1 less to cast generally haven't been amazing in Limited. Not that I've seen. Part of it is because you really want to have multiples of these. You know, if I have 2 of these, if I have 3 of these, really cool, but they're uncommons. You're going to be lucky to get the 1. Not only that, I have to be in blue-red. There are plenty of colorless cards in blue and red, and of course just plenty of colorless cards kicking around in this set. But I don't know if that's going to be the best deck to really jump into colorless creatures matter. I'm going to have to take a look at it. I'm going to have to keep an eye on this card. And yeah, I see the awesome things that I could do with this. I see how just powerful this could be. I see how I could, be ramping even harder with this despite not being in green. But just my history with these cards, my history with these dragons cost 1 less to cast, or instants and sorceries you control cost 1 less to cast, and things like that, have generally been less than stellar. Now, this probably is the broadest one. This probably hits the most potential spells in your deck. So maybe it is going to be slightly better. I'm going to have to see. The fact that it's a 2/4 definitely helps, keep the ground for a little bit. So I'll keep an eye on this. And if I'm feeling wacky, if I'm feeling brave, I might actually give it a go. I will go with C+ on it, but I'm cautious on this thing just because of what history has shown me. Next up, we have Kiora, Master of the Depths. 2 green-blue for a Planeswalker Kiora at Mythic. She has 4 loyalty counters to start. You can +1 her to on-tap up to 1 target creature and up to 1 target land. You can -2 her to reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a creature card and or a land card from among them into your hand. Put the rest into your graveyard. And you can -8 her to get an emblem with and this is important, quote, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it fight target creature. End quote. End of the emblem. Continuing on with the ability, then put 3 8/8 blue octopus creature tokens onto the battlefield. I said it that way because a lot of people assumed or misread that the 3 octopuses were part of the emblem, and that you basically went into an infinite loop of octopuses until you had wiped the board. That's not the case. You get an emblem that says your creatures fight when they enter the battlefield. And then you get 3 8/8 octopuses, which will then fight. And then you're done. The ultimate is done. It's over. You know, you've got the emblem, but the ultimate's over. No infinite octopuses. So, Kiora. I don't like this one as much as the first Kiora. The first ability is relatively mediocre. On-tapping one target creature probably means that I want to be doing this second main phase after I attack with it to give it vigilance, and giving a creature vigilance is okay. It's not great, and it's certainly not bubbling like her first incarnation was. And I can on-tap up to one target land, which means I probably want to cast something and get a mana back in that second main phase, or have played a combat trick. I don't know. It's an ability. It's fine. It's value, but I don't think it's a lot of value. It's a very green-blue ability, and maybe Kiora, maybe the green-blue Planeswalker is just going to have some issues going forward of having enough design space of the color pie. But yeah, it's a very green-blue ability, but it's not an ability I'm super stoked on. Her second ability, I really don't like. You know, it's very similar to Seek the Wilds? Yeah, Seek the Wilds from yesterday, where you're gambling. Now, luckily here, you do get a creature and a land, so you don't have to make a decision between, am I getting the land that I needed to fix and throwing away a good creature? You get both, but I'm just not a fan, usually, of the reveal 4 cards and hope. In Constructed, it's a lot better, where you know your deck, and your deck's more consistent because you're playing a whole bunch of 4-ofs. But in Limited, it's a fairly big gamble to me, so I don't like it. Now, you are going to hit a land the majority of the time, and the creature a fair bit of the time. The rest does get trashed, which kind of sucks. At least Seek the Wild puts it on the bottom of the library. But I don't tend to like this sort of gamble. Her ultimate, yeah, it's good. Her ultimate is going to kill 3 creatures on your opponent's side of the board. Just flat out kill in 99% of the cases. And you're going to have 24 power and toughness on your side. That's pretty darn good. But you've got to get there. I mean, she's fine. She's a Planeswalker. You'll never pass a Planeswalker in most situations. Even if they're bad, they are still a damage sponge. She is still going to eat 5 damage worth of burn spells and attacks and etc. at a minimum. So you're going to first pick her, but I'm not super sold on her. She feels almost like Narset, Enlightened Master or whatever it was from Dragons of Tarkir, where I think she's a card that you'll play and she just won't terribly do too much. Unless you alter, in which case, boy, she's going to do a bunch. So I'm gonna be like a B- on her, I think. You're not going to first pick her, let's be real, but I think she's got way more constructed connotations than she does limited. Next up, we have March from the Tomb. This is a 3 white-black sorcery at rare. Return any number of target ally creature cards with total converted mana cost 8 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you can pull back an 8-drop ally. I don't know if there are any offhand. I don't think so. Or you can pull back, a 5-drop ally and a 3-drop ally, or a 2, and a 2, or 8 1-drops, or whatever. As long as the total of the CMC is 8 or less, you can take them from your graveyard and put them back onto the battlefield. Well, Graveyard to the Battlefield is pretty cool. I do really like Graveyard to Battlefield. I like it way more than I do Graveyard to Hand. But it still never really tends to go off all that well in my experience. You're going to need to have a ton of allies. You're going to need to very solidly be an ally deck. And of course, there are a ton of good ones in white and a fair good number of ones in black. Although I think the more natural ally deck is red-white, but there are a good number in black. Yeah. I don't know about this card. I don't know about it. They don't get haste, so they are just going to be blockers for the turn. You're not going to surprise your opponent with this and, attack for a bunch. You are going to put them all into the battlefield. Now, they do trigger everything, but of course, I find most of the good ally triggers are, giving first strike, giving double strike, giving whatever, and so it's not really going to matter without them getting haste. So I don't know about this. I don't know about this card. I'm going to have to see how it plays out. I'm going to have to see how the white-black version of the ally deck goes and see if this is worth it. Ultimately, I think it's way too cute. I think I'd prefer to just, have this be another really good ally in my deck. And if a bunch of my allies died, cool, I'll continue trying to stabilize the board rather than playing this card, which may just be dead sometimes. If you're doing decently okay, this may just be a dead card. It may bring back a 1-drop for 5 mana, which isn't that good. So I've got to go with a kind of a C- on this. I'm out on Graveyard or March from the Tomb to begin with, but we'll see how it goes. Next up, we have Moonda, Ambush Leader. This is a 2 red-white legendary creature core ally at rare for a 3/4. He has haste and he has rally. Whenever Moonda, Ambush Leader, or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, you may look at the top 4 cards of your library. If you do, reveal any number of ally cards from among them, then put those cards on top of your library in any order, and the rest on the bottom in any order. So very interestingly, you don't have to reveal every ally that you find. So if you find an ally that you really don't want to draw, you can put it on the bottom because you reveal any number of ally cards. That number can be 0, that number can be 1, even if there are 4 allies there. So yeah, he's a 3/4 haste for 4. Cool. That's fine. But I don't know. As I was just saying, I don't really tend to like these look at the top 4 cards of your library and hope spells in limited. In constructed, they're fine. In limited, not as big of a fan. And of course, if it's not an ally, it's going to the bottom. So goodbye removal, goodbye any of your important spells that you need. That I feel hurts more than it helps, unless you're a really ally-heavy deck. Now, of course, you can plan to build around that, but I don't think this guy's first pickable. I don't think he's first pickable at all. Like most gold cards, I think it's totally fine if you're in those colors already. And this one, I don't think super pushes me into red or white if I'm already red or white. So I'm probably going to have to fall on a B- on this one, I think. It's a 3/4 for haste, 3/4 haste for 4, which is pretty solid. Plus maybe a good ability. We'll have to see. But yeah, I'm going to go with B- on this for now. Next up, we have Noyandar, Royal Shaper. This is a 3 white-blue legendary creature merfolk ally at rare. It's a 4/4, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may put 3 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. If you do it, the land becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste that's still a land. So basically, every single instant or sorcery spell you have has Awaken 3 for no extra cost. That's pretty darn good. The body's totally fine as well. 4/4 for 5 is totally fine. Now, my usual prowess concern that you've heard a million times comes into here. We're in limited. We're going to be playing, 15, 16 creatures. We're going to be playing far fewer instants and sorceries. Keep in mind, this doesn't even count non-creature spells, which prowess does. This only counts instants and sorceries. Doesn't count enchantments, doesn't count artifacts, nothing like that. So you're not going to trigger this a billion times, but you may get, 3 triggers off of it, maybe 4 triggers off of it, which is okay. You're going to get a bunch of 3/3s. Now, an interesting Awaken, just to do a quick aside here, an interesting Awaken interaction that I think is going to get a lot of people is you're making your lands vulnerable by making them into 2/2s and 3/3s. they're going to be killable by a number of things. You're going to have to think about chump blocking with your lands. And we all know the pain of being land screwed and not having enough lands. So Awaken does give me slight pause there. I think it's almost always an upside, but there are going to be times where it's going to suck to fall behind on lands because you perhaps greedily awoken something. But anyways, I think this is pretty solid. I think it's a great body. It's in blue-white, which probably plays slightly more instants and sorceries than general. A fair number of white pump spells and a fair number of blue counter and tempo spells. So I think you will get a number of Awaken triggers off of it. And hey, maybe you just pump them all into one land. You know, rather than making a bunch of 3/3s, maybe you make a 3/3 that becomes a 6/6 that becomes a 9/9, which should be pretty darn solid. So I'm pretty happy with this card. I maybe could see myself first picking him and going blue-white, maybe Flyers tempo. So I think this guy gets an A+. I think it's powerful enough. Guy? Girl? Guy? Looks like a guy to me. I think it's enough to get an A- and enough to be in the first pickable range. But we'll have to see. I'm curious to see how it plays out. Next up, we have Omnath, Locus of Rage. This is a 3 red, red, green, green legendary creature elemental at Mythic for a 5/5. It's a 5/5 for 7. And 4 of that is colored. It has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Oh, Omnath, you are interesting. You are big and you cost a buttload. This is going to be difficult to cast. 3 red, red, green, green. You better hope you have some smoothing going on in Evolving Wilds. Make sure you get both of your reds and both of your greens, plus maybe a bit of ramp in there as well. It'll be awesome if you cast it. You know, having a 5/5 that when it dies deals 3 damage is pretty cool. Having a 5/5 that's going to make a 5/5 every single time you put a land into play, cool. This is a 7-drop, so I've got to go with my landfall concern here of just how many times do you expect to activate this, you know, on turn 8 and later in the game. Probably not many times. So you're not going to flood the board with 5/5s. You might get a couple. Maybe. But probably not a huge amount. So I can't be super excited about Omnath. It feels like the incarnation of greed to me. Yeah, it's going to be awesome when you go off with it. Yeah, somebody's going to, you know, beat somebody's face in with it. Hopefully not mine. It's Mythic. I may never even see it. So I'm not super sold on it. I think it's obviously good. It's obviously powerful, but it's so risky to go into and so greedy, I think. So I've got to go with a B- on it. I guess you'd have to first pick it if you wanted to play it because you need to make sure you're in the right deck, the ramp deck that's going to play a bunch of lands. Totally the 18 land deck, of course, as well. But I've got to go with a B- on it. It feels like, as I said, the incarnation of greed. Next up, we have Resolute Blademaster. This is a 3 red-white creature, human soldier, ally, at uncommon. It's a 2/2. It's got Rally. Whenever Resolute Blademaster or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. Well, I like giving my team first strike, so boy do I like giving my team double strike. And as I said, I think red-white is going to be the natural ally deck. Of course, there can totally be basically any color combination can be allies, just some have better allies than the other. This is obviously the I am going allies card. It arguably could be first pickable if you did want to force allies, but I don't tend to recommend forcing an archetype. But if you're red or if you're white, and if any of those are allies and this gets past you, I think it's a huge, huge sign to jump into that deck. Just seems really good. It's 5 mana for a 2/2, which is slightly expensive, but double strike to a huge portion of your team seems really, really good to me. I'm going to probably only ever pass this if I am solidly not in red and white. Just seems really good to me. I've got to go B+ on it, just shy of a A- range, I think. Next up, we have Royal Spout. This is a 1 white-blue sorcery at uncommon. you can put target creature on top of its owner's library. Or you can pay Awaken 4 for 4 white-blue to do the same thing, and of course get a 4/4 land. Well, I'm not a big fan of sorcery speed bounce. Sorcery speed library bounce is a bit better than normal bounce, but you're still just putting them off a draw step for less than a turn. You know, what equates to being about half of a turn, maybe 3/4 of a turn, you're putting them off that creature because they're going to draw it and replay it pretty darn quickly. Being 2 colors means it's even harder to cast, which makes it even less exciting to me. Late game, being able to make a 4/4 with it, well, that's a bit more exciting. I get to have a 4/4 plus take their creature off for almost a full turn cycle. But it's still not super exciting to me. This is not going to push me into white or blue. If I'm white or blue and I see this card and there's a better white card in there or a better blue card in there, I'm probably just going to take it. And another color combination may even have a better card sitting in the pack that I'm past. So I don't think it's super good. I don't think it's enough to push me into a color. I certainly don't think it's first pickable. I just think it's kind of fine. If I'm blue and white, then yeah, I'm going to take a look at this card. But I think I have to be those 2 colors already for me to give this too much more consideration. So C+ for me, obviously significantly lower if you're only in one of those colors so far in the draft. Next up, we have Sire of Stagnation. This is a 4 blue-black creature eldrazi at Mythic. It's a 5/7. It's got Devoid. And it's got whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, reverse landfall, that player exiles the top 2 cards of his or her library, and you draw 2 cards. So your opponent plays a land, and you draw 2 cards, and they mill 2 cards into exile. This doesn't seem that good to me. Doesn't seem that good to me, and I'm sure everybody's going, wait, why? It is the blue-black mascot. It's late-game card advantage, which is awesome. Drawing 2 cards a turn, super cool. However, this is a 6-drop. Your opponent, on turn 6, is already going to have started to think about not putting down lands. Because, of course, when you get to a certain number of lands, you just stop putting them down so that they stay as mystery cards in your hand instead. Now, this set, of course, does have landfall, so people are going to be more readily putting down cards. But if your opponent doesn't have landfall, they can just not play lands and probably be totally fine. And so this is just a big dumb 5/7, which is still something. You know, it's still kind of like a Vastwood Gorger, I guess, but it's not nearly as exciting as the words printed on there. Now, if you are in any way ahead because your opponent has stumbled, if they're stuck on 5 lands and you play this, then you're going to get some value out of it. You're either going to lock them down or you're going to get some card advantage. So I think it is still a fine card. I'm just hesitant to be super excited about it because of how easily my opponent can just say, cool, I'm not going to give you any value. And that's going to hurt. So I'm not super sold on this guy. I don't think it's first pickable in any way. Again, I don't know what it is with these multicolored cards, but it doesn't feel like mythic to me. Maybe it feels like a rare. Certainly doesn't feel like a mythic to me. So I've got to go with a B- on this. I'm happy to have it, I guess, if I'm blue-black, but I am slightly hesitant about just how much control my opponent gets over whether it works or not. Next up, we have Skyrider Elf. Skyrider Elf is an X green-blue creature elf warrior ally at uncommon for a 0/0. Well, that's overcosted. It's got flying. It's got converge. Skyrider Elf enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. So you can play this for blue-green, which you probably will the vast majority of the time, and you get a 2/2 flyer, which is totally fine. If you have some extra colors kicking around, then you can make X1, you can make X2, you can make X3, and turn this into a 3/4 or 5/5 flyer, which is fine. This obviously is pretty good in the Converge deck, the 5-color Good Stuff Converge deck, but I think it's also totally just fine in the blue-green, whatever blue-green turns out to be deck, as a 2/2 flyer. Not super exciting, not amazing, but just a good role filler, just an aggressive 2/2 flyer. So I'm going to go with a C+ on it. I'll play it most of the time, but I don't know just how highly I'm going to take it. I think if you're the green-blue drafter, you're probably just going to be able to get these. You'll be fighting with somebody else drafting blue-green, which if you've read the table, shouldn't be there, or you're going to be fighting with 5-color Converge, which I don't know will be in every draft anyways. Next up, we have Ulamog's Nullifier. This is a 2 blue-black creature eldrazi processor at uncommon. It's a 2/3. It's got Devoid. It's got Flash. It's got Flying. And when Ulamog's Nullifier enters the battlefield, you may put 2 cards your opponents own from exile into their owner's graveyards. If you do, counter target spell. Well, it's a 2/3 Flash Flyer for 4, which is fine enough. That gets an include because of the body right there. But as I've talked about, I'm not super sold on the ingest process mechanic being reliable. This one even asks more than most of them in that I need to have 2 cards exiled in order for it to happen. Now, if you look at the way it's worded, it says opponents and put it into their owner's graveyards, which screams to me multiplayer commander. So basically, as long as a couple of people have had cards exiled, I can take that player's card from exile and I can take that player's card from exile in order to counter a spell. In a 1v1 limited game, I just don't see it super reliably happening. So I've got to be kind of out on this. I'm going to give it a C+. I think I'm going to pass this a whole lot of the time, even if I'm blue-black. I'm just not sure. I feel like it just feels kind of like a French vanilla Flash Flyer to me, so C+ for me. Finally, for multicolored cards, we have Veteran Warleader. This is a 1 green-white creature human soldier ally. At rare, it's a star, and Veteran Warleader's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control, so it's at least a 1/1, if it's the only one down. It's got something else. You can tap another untapped ally you control, and Veteran Warleader gains your choice of First Strike, Vigilance, or Trample until end of turn. Yeah, I like this guy a whole lot. I tend to like cards that have a lot of choices and a lot of paths that I can go with it. So the fact that I can, let's say we have 4 creatures down. We're not going to get super greedy, but we have 4 creatures, including this one, so it's a 4/4. I like the fact that I can give this First Strike if my opponent has, a relatively big thing that I would have to trade with otherwise. I like that I can give it Vigilance if I just want to keep back a blocker. I like that I can give it Trample if maybe my opponent just has small things and I want to get in for some extra damage. I like having options. We've had creatures like this before where we've gotten a choice of what ability we want it to have on a turn-by-turn basis. The fact, of course, that you can tap 2 allies to give it First Strike and Trample or First Strike and Vigilance makes it a little bit better than that even. You do, of course, need to be in a super heavy allies deck. This isn't tap another untapped creature. It is tap another untapped ally. So there is that cost to it. Of course, even the biggest of ally decks are going to have non-allies in it. But I still think it's going to be pretty darn solid. If it had lifelink as one of the options, it would be incredibly good. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite have the lifelink option, but it's still got a pretty darn amount of good ones. And for just a 3-drop, it feels really well costed. I think this is going to be a real beating if you're in a sort of white weenie, green kind of wide deck. Maybe you could even justify playing those plant makers in order to make plants to make this even bigger if you really wanted to get greedy. But yeah, I like this creature. I tend to like creatures that get bigger the wider your board get when they're in green-white, which is the token producer colors, which is the small creature colors. Pretty happy to have this. I'm going to pick it pretty highly. It might even be another of the first picks that pushes me into those colors right away. But I should probably learn my lesson and not do that terribly often. But I'm going to go with an A- on it. I really, really like Veteran Warleader. Perhaps it's just my bias for green-white aggro. So that's going to wrap it up for multicolored, but we've got another brief addition to this video. This video is going to cover the artifacts as well. There's not many. There's only, I think, 6. Yeah, it looks like 6 to me. And the first one we've got is Aligned. I said that really weirdly because I've been saying ally so much. Aligned Hedrun Network. For 4 colorless mana, you get an artifact at rare that says, when Aligned Hedrun Network enters the battlefield, exile all creatures with power 5 or greater until Aligned Hedrun Network leaves the battlefield. This is cool. It is symmetrical, so be very careful. This is going to take away your big guys as well. I think this probably fits best in the ally deck that has a lot of, 4 power or less creatures. But the one thing to keep in mind is your opponent doesn't tend to have 2, 3, 4, 5 power greater creatures. If they do, you probably should have just lost the game already. So I don't see this tending to hit too many things. I see this tending to be a single creature removal spell. It's obviously not worded to be spot removal, but I think in limited at least it's going to just be spot removal. In Commander, whole other story in Commander. But in limited, I think this is going to be spot removal for one single eldrazi. The nice thing is that this does, completely bypass Ulamog's Indestructible. You're not going to play against Ulamog all that often, but hey, even this can take down Ulamog, which, looking at the art and looking at the flavor text, seems to be what it's meant to do. But yeah, I wouldn't get too excited for this, blanking your opponent's team, because if your opponent's team looks like that, you'll probably be dead before you even manage to draw this. So I think this is ultimately less good than it appears, but it is still going to be 4 mana spot removal for, kind of a monstrous thing. So I am going to give it, I think, a C+. I think there's enough reliability that you're going to be facing 5 power creatures to main deck this, but that could be wrong. So keep an eye on what tends to be on the other side of the board. This could actually fall into a sideboard card where you only play it if you're up against big Eldrazi. So keep an eye on that. I'm going to go with C+ for now. That might be a bit too high. Next up, we have Hedrun Archive. This is a 4 mana artifact at uncommon. You can tap it to add 2 to your mana pool, or you can pay 2, tap it, and sack it to draw 2 cards. So it's double Mind Stone. Mind Stone is 2 mana, tap it to add 1 mana, and pay 1 mana to sack it to draw 1 card. So it's half of Hedrun Archive. This is fine. This is totally fine. 4 mana for a double mana rock is fine. It's going to help you ramp. It's going to help you ramp into big Eldrazi. And once you've got enough lands or enough spells, or you've cast your big stuff, you can sack it to draw 2 cards. And 2 cards is pretty darn good, especially for just 2 mana after you've used this to, kind of pay itself off pretty quickly. I like it. I like it a lot. I'm going to probably look to take these pretty highly. As soon as a pack dries up, I'm going to be looking to take these because, of course, it fits in every single deck. There's very few decks that wouldn't want to play this. Only the most aggressive decks wouldn't want to touch this. Every other deck would be totally happy to have this. So I'm actually pretty happy to give this a B-, which is a high grade for such a boring spell, but you've got to have good utility, and this is a solid utility spell. Next up, we have Hedrun Blade. This is a single mana artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature becomes blocked by 1 or more colorless creatures, it gains Death Touch until end of turn, and it's got an equip cost of 2 colorless mana. I don't really like this. If you're up against a colorless deck, sure. +1/+1 equipment has typically been pretty damn mediocre. Veteran's Blade was one of the cheapest +1/+1 equipments we've had, and even that was barely playable. I never played it. I hated it. And whenever I saw it on the other side of the board, I was pretty happy to see my opponent playing it. So I don't think you're ever going to play this as a +1/+1 sword. I could see siding this in if you're up against a whole bunch of colorless creatures. Then maybe this gains some value. But even then, there's probably a million other ways that I would prefer to sideboard beyond this. So I've got to give this a D-. I think this is going to sit in the board way more than it is going to get boarded in, and I don't think you should ever main deck it. Next up, we have Pathway Arrows. This is a single mana artifact equipment at uncommon. Equipped creature has pay 2 mana, tap it. This creature deals 1 damage to target creature. If a colorless creature is dealt damage this way, tap it. Equip 2 colorless mana. This, again, I think is sideboard against colorless decks, but even then, I don't think it's that good. Being able to tap the creature is okay, but I have to pay 2 mana for it, so it's not even like a free tap. I have to pay into it. Not a fan of it. If you do have some Death Touchers kicking around, I might look into main decking this, because, of course, this thing on a Death Toucher means that you get to just spot kill creatures with it, because the creature deals the damage, not the arrow, and so the Death Touch would apply. So keep that synergy in mind. I definitely am looking to have some fun with that, because I think if you want a pathway arrows, you can get it if it's in your pot. I don't think anybody should be taking this very highly, and if they do, they're probably not that great of a player. So I'm going to give this a D+, and note that I have hopes to throw this on a Death Toucher at some point. Next up, we have Pilgrim's Eye. This is a 3 colorless mana artifact creature Thopter at uncommon. It's a 1/1 Thopter. It has flying, and when Pilgrim Eye enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. This isn't very exciting. It's not ramp because it goes into your hand, of course. It's at best color fixing, in that you get to go and get whichever basic it is that you need. Slightly relevant, it is basic land, not any land, so you can't go get your man land, you can't go get your duels or anything like that. It's going to help you, get what you need. And I think that means it's going to kind of fit into the Converge decks and maybe the decks that are splashing, and not terribly fit into any other deck, because it is a 3 mana 1/1 flyer, which is pretty darn unexciting. It's going to die to a lot of things. It's not going to block well. I think if you want one and it's in the draft, you can probably get it, but I don't think most decks are going to want this, so I'm going to go with a C- on it. Finally, for the artifacts and for this video, we have Slab Hammer. Slab Hammer is a 2 colorless mana artifact equipment at uncommon. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. If you do, the creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Equip cost of 2. So this is one of those fun pieces of equipment that don't do anything when you attach it to your creature, and it only does something when it's attacking, and it only does something when you're attacking if you bounce a land back to your hand. This feels way too cute to me. Way too cute to me. So bouncing lands to get another landfall trigger and a bit of boost doesn't really seem like something that I want to waste an entire card slot on. Plus, you don't get the landfall trigger until after the creature attacks, because of course the trigger to bounce the land doesn't happen until you attack. So if you're attacking with a landfall creature and you're hoping to get a trigger off of it, it's not going to happen. Ugh. I don't get this card. It feels super weak to me. I feel it's got to be a trap. It's got to be a skill tester for newer players. This card is just bad. I don't think I ever want to play it. I don't think it's ever going to work quite the way you want it. It's just a straight up F for me. I don't like this card. I'm never going to touch it. I'm never going to play it. If somebody else wants it, it's there for them, because I'm not touching it. Straight up F. All right, that's going to wrap it up for our first miscellaneous video, the multicolored artifact video. Tomorrow is going to be the colorless non-devoid cards, plus all of the lands. So stay tuned for that video. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at @TheManaLeak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/TheManaLeak. You've already found me here on YouTube. You've got that comment section down below. Love seeing you guys make use of that. It's gotten a ton of use with this set review cycle, not to mention just a ton of new subscribers. So if you're brand new, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm around all week. Every week I produce a ton of videos. And if you want to see those videos, you should subscribe. There's a button below each video. There's one on the outro of each video, and that'll keep you posted on all the latest Crack-a-Pack Tuesdays, Wacky Wednesdays, Spiky Saturdays, and all the other videos that pop up here or there. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all next time.